Hello everybody and welcome to the 5th lesson of the iGCSE Biology 9-1 course. This video is going to cover the following specification points on differentiation in specialized cells. Now, this video is tailored for the Edexcel iGCSE course and preparing you for its exam. However, if you're studying under another exam board like AQA or Cambridge, you'll probably still find this video useful. Without further ado, let's dive in. Multicellular organisms like animals and plants all begin life as a single fertilized egg cell, known as a zygote. This zygote divides into 2 cells, then 4, then 8, and so on. This process is called mitosis, where a cell duplicates all of its contents, including its DNA and all of the organelles, and splits to form 2 identical cells. We'll look at this mitosis in greater detail in a later video. For now, you have to notice that as the embryo develops, these initially identical cells start to specialize for specific functions, in a process we call differentiation. Depending on their location in the embryo, different types of cells will form. For example, a cell could form a nerve cell in the spinal cord area of the embryo, or it could be an epidermal cell if it's in the skin. This is how tissues develop. You get all of those similar cells working together to perform a specific function. You get that tissue, and then those combine to form organs, organ systems, and ultimately we get a fully functional organism made up of a variety of specialized cells doing their jobs. Now that we understand that differentiation produces specialized cells, let's focus on these cells themselves. Specialized cells have specific adaptations, such as a distinct shape or unique features that allow them to perform particular functions. In simple terms, they are the specialists. They're built for a specific job. And as part of your specification, we need to learn a few key examples you see on the screen of specialized cells, and the adaptations that make these cells unique and make them perform their jobs efficiently. Let's start by looking at some specialized animal cells. First, we've got to take a look at the sperm cell. The first thing you'll notice is that sperm cells have a tail, and the correct scientific term for this in biology is a flagellum. We actually mentioned this flagellum before when we studied bacteria, because bacteria also have flagella, like this one. This is there to help them swim towards the egg for fertilization, their key function. If you're not familiar with how fertilization works, check out our video on it, but in short, a sperm cell from the father and an egg cell from the mother each contain half the total DNA of a normal cell, and when they fuse, they form a zygote with a complete set of DNA, the first cell that makes you. That brings us nicely on to the next key adaptation, the nucleus. Sperm cells only carry half the total DNA of a normal cell, 23 out of 46 chromosomes of DNA. This is important for fertilization, because when the sperm and egg fuse, they must form a zygote with a full set of DNA. So when you have 23 from the mom and 23 from the dad, they can actually add up to make 46, as they should. Next, let's talk about the acrosome. This is a small enzyme-filled structure in the head of the sperm. When a sperm reaches an egg cell, it releases these enzymes to break through the egg's protective membrane, allowing the sperm to enter so fertilization can happen. Then there's the middle section, which is packed with mitochondria. Since sperm cells are constantly swimming, they need a lot of energy to constantly move and swim like that. And what happens in mitochondria? Aerobic respiration, which releases this energy. Having lots of mitochondria helps power the sperm's movement so it can actually reach the egg instead of running out of energy halfway through. And that allows it to be successful in performing its function of fertilization. One last adaptation is the sperm's streamlined shape, which makes it faster and more efficient when it moves. That's a key feature, and here's an important keyword you have to learn. We don't just describe this as movement in biology, it's called motility. A sperm cell's motility refers specifically to its ability to move independently using metabolic energy, energy that comes from respiration, metabolism. So make sure you understand that. So, quick summary, the function of a sperm cell is to carry genetic information from the father through the female reproductive tract to fertilize the egg cell in sexual reproduction. And all of these adaptations help it do just that. Next up, we have the nerve cell, or neuron. Neurons have a very unique structure and shape, so let's break down their key adaptations. First, they contain a lot of dendrites, which extend from the cell body. These are like branches that connect to other neurons, and that's important because nerve tissues are basically just chains of interconnected nerve cells or neurons that pass electrical impulses around the body. One connects to the other and passes the impulse to the other. That's how it works. So these dendrites allow them to connect with each other and branch out to make sure that those impulses go up and down the body. Then there's the axon. that long, elongated part of the cell that actually carries those nerve impulses up and down the body. And finally, there's the myelin sheath. And pay attention to that spelling there. But it's a layer of fatty insulation that protects the axon, and it speeds up the transmission of these impulses. It's kind of like the insulation around an electrical wire. When the myelin sheath is healthy and fully functional, nerve signals are sent and received much faster. To sum it up, the function of a nerve cell is to carry electrical impulses throughout the body and brain, or the central nervous system. Next up, we have the muscle cell, specifically a skeletal muscle cell, the type of muscle cell connected to your bones that allows you to move. That's where the skeletal part comes from. It's connected to your bones. Of course, there are other types of muscle cells like smooth muscle cells, but right now we're focusing on skeletal muscle only. First, you might notice that these cells have a long, cylindrical shape. They're tube-like, which allows them to contract and relax efficiently. They need to be larger than most other cells to generate those strong contractions that can move your bones. They're also packed with mitochondria. And as we know, mitochondria are the sites of aerobic respiration, where energy is released to fuel these muscular contractions. And since these cells require a constant energy supply, they also store lots of glycogen, which, as we know, it can be broken down into glucose when they need it. If you remember the equation for aerobic respiration, you'll know that this glucose is essential to producing ATP and releasing that energy. So it's the molecule that provides the energy for the cell, and by having a large glycogen store, these muscles make sure they have a lot of energy and a lot of respiration happening for those contractions. Finally, skeletal muscle contain myofibrils. Now, you don't need to know too much about them at GCSE, but they're made of proteins that slide past each other, shortening the muscle fiber and causing that muscle to contract. That's why muscles need protein in the first place. It's essential for building and maintaining all the structures that make the muscle up. To summarize, the function of a muscle cell is to contract and relax, which enables movements in the body. The next cell we're going to look at, and this one is really important now, is the red blood cell. These are the cells that carry oxygen around your body, from your lungs to your muscles or respiring tissues, and then back to your lungs again constantly, all the time. They love to ask you questions about these cells, so make sure you pay close attention to these key features that make it specialized for its function. First off, red blood cells have a biconcave disc shape. Super important you learn that term, because that's exactly what they expect you to write in your exam. Here's a diagram to give you a better idea of what that actually looks like in 3D. And why is this shape important anyway? How does it help the cell perform its function more efficiently? Well, if you look at the shape itself, you'll see that it increases the surface area of the cell. And this means that the cell can carry more oxygen. The larger the surface area, the more oxygen molecules can bind to the surface of the cell and be transported efficiently. Obviously, to let that oxygen in, the red blood cell, much like the rest of animal cells, has a cell membrane, which is a sort of exchange surface for the gases. It allows oxygen and carbon dioxide to pass in and out by diffusion. Once the oxygen gets inside, it binds to a protein called hemoglobin. Keyword there, make sure you spell it right. Hemoglobin contains iron, and it reacts with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. Then, when the red blood cell reaches respiring tissues that need oxygen, the reaction reverses, releasing the oxygen so that the cells in those tissues can take that oxygen in and use it for aerobic respiration. One last thing, red blood cells have no nucleus actually. And yeah, that does make them more efficient. Why? Because it frees up space for more hemoglobin, meaning that the cell can carry even more oxygen instead of wasting space on a nucleus. There's a larger surface area and a greater number of hemoglobin molecules, so that means more oxygen can bind to the hemoglobin in this cell, and the cell itself can transport more oxygen around the body. So, to sum it up, the function of a red blood cell is to transport oxygen from the lungs to all of your cells and respiring tissues in your body. And it also has to get rid of carbon dioxide from those tissues, which is a waste product from the respiration of them. Because if that carbon dioxide stays in your body too long, it can be toxic. So respiration, it needs oxygen, which the blood cells bring, and then the blood cells take away the carbon dioxide that could be toxic and exhale it out from your lungs. Next up, we have the egg cell. Earlier, we looked at the sperm cell, which is the male gamete or sex cell, and now we're looking at the egg cell, which is the female gamete or female sex cell. Next up, we have the egg cell. Earlier, we looked at the sperm cell, which is the male gamete or male sex cell, and now we're looking at the egg cell, the female. Next up, we have the egg cell. Earlier, we looked at the sperm cell, which is the male gamete or male sex cell. And now we're looking at the egg cell, the female gamete. One of its key adaptations is that, just like a sperm cell, it has a haploid nucleus, which just means it contains 23 chromosomes of DNA, instead of the usual 46 like we mentioned earlier. This, again, is crucial for fertilization because, like we saw, when the egg and sperm combine, their genetic material, all of those chromosomes, merge to restore the full 46 chromosome set, the number you find in a normal human cell and in a zygote. Another interesting adaptation, which you'll explore more at A level, is that the egg cell membrane can actually change. When a sperm successfully fertilizes the egg, the 23 chromosomes from the sperm's haploid nucleus combine with the egg's 23 chromosomes, forming a full set of 46, the typical number, the number we want in all of your cells. But here's the issue. If another sperm were to enter suddenly at the same time and also fuse with the other two nuclei, it would disrupt this number of 46, leading to some serious problems. We actually call this polyspermy, when multiple sperm fertilize the same egg cell, and instead of 46 chromosomes, you get a lot more. To prevent that, as soon as fertilization occurs, the egg cell actually undergoes membrane changes that block any additional sperm from entering, an adaptation that makes sure that your cells have 46 chromosomes and you come out healthy. Finally, the egg cell has a high volume of cytoplasm, packed with nutrients that support the early embryo's development. As we know, in any cell, the cytoplasm is just full of different nutrients. And to put this into perspective, egg cells are actually the largest cells in the human body, containing far more cytoplasm than a typical cell, which makes perfect sense. This zygote that the embryo starts off as is constantly dividing by mitosis, constantly replicating all of its DNA, all of its organelles. And that's a very energy expensive process. It needs a lot of nutrients to be able to do that in a normal fashion. To sum it up, the egg cell's function is to connect and fuse with a male sperm cell to become fertilized and produce offspring through sexual reproduction. Now let's move on to plant cells, starting with the palisade cell, which we actually studied before. If you don't remember, this cell is found in the leaves of the plant, and the leaves are an organ dedicated to photosynthesis. Palisade cells are specialized to maximize this photosynthesis and have a few key features that help them do just that. First, they contain a lot of chloroplasts. These chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, the green pigment responsible for trapping light energy, which is a crucial step for photosynthesis. Additionally, their shape allows for a very large surface area, helping them absorb as much light as possible to maximize photosynthesis. To sum it up, the function of the palisade cells is to trap sunlight, carry out photosynthesis, and generate that food that the plant needs to survive. The next cell we're going to look at is the root hair cell. Now, if you remember from the start of the video, this one is actually specifically listed in your specification, just like the red blood cell is, so examiners love to ask about it. Make sure you focus and write down all of these key features and learn them well. So the root hair cell's function is to absorb water and minerals from the soil, which the plant needs to survive. And to perform this function efficiently, they have several key adaptations. The first one is that they have a semi-permeable membrane, which allows water and mineral ions to pass into the cell. Now that's actually a new key term, but all semi-permeable means is that the membrane is somewhat or semi-permeable, where permeability is the ability to allow liquids and gases to pass through it. By being semi-permeable, the membrane only allows certain substances through, but not others. And in this case, the substances it allows through is water molecules and those important mineral ions. Make sure you learn that definition. Another key feature is that root hair cells contain no chloroplasts whatsoever. And this makes complete sense, because we find roots underground, and no sunlight reaches underground anyway. Since they never receive sunlight, they don't photosynthesize, and so having chloroplasts would be a total waste. They also have a large permanent vacuole, which stores cell sap, a solution of water and mineral salts. A larger vacuole means more space to store the water absorbed into the cell, helping the plant stay healthy and maximizing the intake of those substances they need, the water and mineral ions. Finally, looking at the shape, you'll notice that there's an end of the cell that sticks out, or as biologists like to call it, a protrusion in the cell. And in this case specifically, we're asked to refer to it as a hair-like protrusion. That's what it always says on the mark schemes, and those are the words you need to specify to score your marks. This protrusion protrudes out, and which leads to a surface area. This protrusion protrudes out, and this protrusion protrudes out, leading to a larger. This protrusion protrudes out, leading to a larger surface area. This protrusion protrudes out, and this protrusion protrudes. This protrusion protrudes out, leading to a larger. This protrusion protrudes out, leading to a larger surface area for maximizing absorption of water and minerals from the soil. To summarize, the function of a root hair cell is to absorb water and dissolved minerals from the soil surrounding the plant roots. As always, for a brief review, these two tables summarize all the different animal and plant cells you need to learn and the key adaptations you'll need to know for your exam. Pause the video and make sure you're comfortable with these things before moving on. Now we're going to move on to some past paper questions. These are questions I've taken from real iGCSE papers, and they're the kind of questions you're likely to be asked about this topic in your exam. Take a look at this first question. Pause the video and give it a try. Here is my answer to it. And here's the mark scheme. Now, you might have struggled with this one a little bit, since it actually describes the processes that happen to allow the water and mineral ions in, which are diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. And we look at those in a later video, so you might not know them yet. But the key part here is that you identified the features and adaptations that the root cell had. Let me go back to my answer actually. Yes, here. Everything highlighted in red is stuff that's covered in later lessons, so you don't have to worry about it for now. And if we go back to the mark scheme, you see that we mentioned. Here is my answer to it, and here's the mark scheme. Now, you might have struggled with this one actually, since it describes the processes that happen that allow the water and mineral ions in, which are diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, and we look at those in a later video, so you might not know them yet. But the key part here is that you identified the features or key adaptations that the root hair cells had, and you could have still scored all 4 marks if you'd done that. Also, if we go back to the mark scheme, you see there what we mentioned about the hair-like protrusion earlier. The mark scheme does in fact mention protuberance, which also just means protrusion. So while mark schemes might vary every exam session and you might have a different answer in one mark scheme compared to another, making sure you use the right terminology and including every detail you know and have learnt should ensure that you score every single mark regardless of the year or the mark scheme. So make sure you always write everything you know in biology and not just leave some things because you've seen it on a certain mark scheme. Maybe one year they're looking for something more specific. You never know, so make sure you write everything you learn. Now have a go at this next question, which is actually split up into 3 parts. Pause the video and try this first part. Here is my answer to it, and here is the mark scheme. As you can see, it talks about the sperm's acrosome first and how it penetrates the egg membrane, and then any mention of the genetic material within the sperm is valid. We look at genes and alleles and how fertilization happens later in the reproduction topic, so don't worry about those for now. Your current knowledge should be enough to score 2 marks on this question. Great, now try part 2 of that question. Here is my answer, and here is the mark scheme. We know that there's mitochondria in the middle piece, and aerobic respiration happens in these mitochondria to produce ATP or release energy. Do not make the mistake here of saying produce energy, because as you might have learned in physics, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. You're producing ATP, which is broken down to release energy from breaking those chemical bonds. And finish off this question now with the third part, asking about the tail or flagellum of the sperm. Here is my answer, and here's the mark scheme. We discussed the idea of motility earlier, and how that's the top end grade 9 vocabulary. Here it just says movement, but you should always aim to use that vocabulary in your exams. Always. You wouldn't get marked down if you just said movement or swimming, since those are obviously correct answers too. Check your answers now and give yourself a total score for that question. Moving on now, pause the video and try this new question about a nerve cell. Here is my answer to it, and here is the mark scheme. I mentioned the first 2 points, but really any of these points would work. Don't worry if you don't know what synapses are. Again, that's something we look at in a later topic on the nervous system and the coordination topic. Check your answer though, and give yourself a score out of 2 here. And now our last question for today will be this, about red blood cells. Pause the video and try answering it. Here is my answer to it, and here is the mark scheme. The key part is that you got the keyword of biconcave disc shape, and then describe the effect of the larger surface area on how much more oxygen could be carried or transported. Then for the second part of the question, you just needed to briefly describe hemoglobin's function as a respiratory pigment that oxygen binds to. And with that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you found this video useful, please drop a like, subscribe, and share to support my channel and help more students find these videos. For more lessons, check out my iGCSE Edexcel biology playlist, and feel free to comment down below or reach out via email if you have any questions. That's all for this lesson. Have a nice day.